Okay, that's all good. Well, good to see you all here today. For those of you that have joined some of our webinars previously, my name's, you'll know my name, it's Jamie Watt. For those who haven't joined it previously, my name is Jamie Watt, and I'm a partner here at Harper McLeod. We're a firm of solicitors, lawyers in the UK, and we deal with a whole host of different things, but particularly music and entertainment matters. With me today is my colleague, Graham Horseman. Give us a wave, Graham. Excellent. All good. So, whilst I lead our media and entertainment team, I deal generally with kind of what we call non-contentious matters. So, kind of contracts, strategies, and things like that. Graham is a guy who deals with, how would I best put it, arguments. He's a litigator. So when people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, Graham is the man that will help you get that sorted out, hopefully. So in today's webinar, we're going to be looking at maximizing your money. Now, there is a facility for asking questions as you go along. If you just pop these into the chat box, I've got that running. We will try and pick up questions as and when we go along. If some of them are probably best dealt with towards the end of things, then just pop them in there and we will pick up with them later on after we've finished the main presentations. Try to keep it quite interactive, so please feel free to ask away on things and we can pick up as required. I mean, don't hold back. We do a lot of work with the Musicians Union. One of the things that we offer as part of our engagement with the Musicians Union is a point of contact for you guys to pick up with a lawyer and ask questions. We don't charge for that. So if you've got ad hoc queries, you want to run something by us, feel free to get in touch. And our contact details are at the end of the presentation. We'd much rather you did ask a question about something before it became a problem, rather than come to us after it's become a problem because you didn't want to bother us in the initial place. It's much easier to sort things before they become an issue a lot of times. So please feel free to use and abuse us with your questions. As time goes on, and don't hold back because we are here to help. So on to the presentation. If we could move to the first slide, Kira, would be great. Yes, we're there. So today we're going to be talking about maximizing money. Now, I'm going to cover off the kind of key sources of income and the things that you should do in relation to those areas. I'll run through some key points on that. Graham's going to come on and talk about what would happen or what you could do or what you should do if those arrangements you have with people, as I said, don't work out the way you're expecting them to work out. So he's going to deal with the various different ways and means in which you can try and get money back when people aren't paying you. You can raise proceedings and claims against people of various different court processes that you have. Particularly one of the areas that Graham's going to touch on is kind of what we call a summary procedure in Scotland. People generally refer to it more often as a small claims procedure, but I know that's something which is quite relevant, particularly when you're looking at getting money back for kind of the smaller arrangements that you have. Be quite quick and effective for that. So, okay, so the areas I'm going to look at, first of all, you're all musicians. You're either going to be writing songs and or performing on songs. So people will make sound recordings of those songs, maybe yourselves, and then you will look to sell those sound recordings. So effectively selling records, selling copies of the works that you create. The second area we're going to look at is what we generally refer to as publishing income. And that's where, as a songwriter, you do money from having your work performed or broadcast or played in public. licensing a song to use in television or film, go synchronization. You're a performer, you're getting performance royalties through. So stuff kind of like in that area, which is kind of income separate to the immediate exploitation of the pure sound recording in the first place, exploitation of kind of broadcast and performance rights and other rights that you can use in relation to a piece of music. Third area, very important area historically, maybe not so in the last couple of years, but coming back, hopefully more and more so over the next few months, and that's live performance, events, gigs, etc., etc. And lastly, I'm going to have a look at what we call merchandising rights. So that's the sale of things like T-shirts, primarily, could be posters, photographs. If you look at a band like Kiss, it could be T-shirts, posters, photographs, and pretty much anything else you can put a Kiss logo on, including ultimately things like coffins. People are buried in Kiss coffins, but all of that can bring income into you as a musician. So if we move on to the next slide here, it'd be great. Okay, so when you're looking at selling records, the first thing you're probably going to look at is how you're going to structure these arrangements in relation to kind of direct sales of copies. Once you've got your song recorded down and ready to play out there, sell to people, are you going to do this directly? Are you going to press your own copies, get them out there to shops? Are you going to upload them to digital platforms and sell them through there directly yourself, effectively without the involvement of a separate record label? You're going to do it through your own record label, have your own imprint. The benefit of doing that, of course, is that, if your digital platform is sharing, the income from people buying copies of your work, 30% to them and 70% to whoever uploads it, you're going to get a bigger share than if you pass your musical work to somebody who then passes it on to a platform. So doing things directly yourself, you get a bigger share of the money. Why you might not do that, of course, is that if you interact with somebody else as an intermediary, whether it's a record label, distribution company or something like that, they might be able to get you a better deal. They might be able to bring greater attention to your work. They might be able to give you marketing and promotion support. So, whilst you might get a smaller share if you've got somebody, an intermediary in place between you and the ultimate sale point to the consumer, you might be getting a smaller share of a bigger amount, So it's kind of, there are different costs and benefits, whether you want to do it yourself directly or interact with somebody else. Conversely, if you're becoming hugely popular because you're out there doing gigs, word of mouth has gone around, and people are getting to know the act without, the involvement of a record label, without the involvement of a distribution company. Why would you involve them? It is something which you have to look at. If you put a lot of work into it yourself, you might not need these people to help you. So, look at the different ways and means and strategies that you could use to get your direct sales out there, whether you do it yourself or whether you interact with somebody else. If you're interacting with other people, as I said, you're generally going to be looking at a record label or a distribution company. Record label, in essence, traditionally will take an assignment, transfer of your copyright in respect of certain respects. They will, in the sound recording, and then they will sell that sound recording to people. They will be the primary recipient of income from sales of copies of that sound recording. and then they will pay you a royalty. Now, there's no real hard and fast rule around what royalty they will pay you. Depends on the label. If you're looking at a major label, your royalty is probably going to be fairly small compared to what you might get out of a small, medium-sized independent. If you look at something like Factory Records that did Happy Mondays and a whole host of other bands initially came out of Manchester, their deal with artists was very simple, 50-50 down the middle, which is great, it's fair, but, you might get that of a small to medium-sized independent. You're not going to get that out of a major label these days, But at the same point in time, if you're going with a major, you're probably going to get things like tour support, significant promotion and marketing, people out there plugging it into Spotify, plugging it into radio, and you're going to get, a beast behind you that wants to sell millions of copies, very much more a business. So, again, different costs and benefits. A distribution arrangement is slightly different from a record label. Effectively, they're taking the copies of the work that you get and they're taking it out to sell it into shops, physical copies, traditionally. You get electronic distributors, which again will do a split on income. They will take your work and they will plug it in to a platform like iTunes, Spotify, Apple Music, it's not called actually, Spotify, the various other platforms that are out there. But again, there will be a royalty split on it. So, look at the splits in these contracts, look at what other, support that they're going to give you. A higher royalty, less support, a low royalty should equate with greater support. So look at, if you're getting into bed with a third party, to do stuff for you, look at what they're going to do for you. Primary income is going to come down to whoever owns the copyright in the song, whoever owns copyright in the sound recording. Primarily, that's going to be the author, the copyright in the song. If a record label or somebody else, something like that, has paid and helped you, entered into a contract with you to record the work, they may be the sound recording copywriter. Two different copyrights there that you've got to think about. If you're a performer, purely performing somebody else's work on record, you're not going to get a primary interest in copyright relating to that work. However, you will get what we call our performer's rights. And that's a right as a performer on a sound recording to authorize the issue of that sound recording to the public, etc., etc. So as a performer on a sound recording, you will get a level of interest there. Now, whether you're a songwriter, whether you're a performer, whatever relationship you're into here, you're going to potentially have to look at and consider when you're creating that song, when you're performing on a work, where are your rights as author of that work or performer on that work going to be going to? So think about that. If you're a songwriter and you're getting other people to record your song, are the rights, the performing rights, coming across to you? Are you able to take the end result, which is being a sound recording of a song, and properly exploit that, depending what situation you're in? Are you able to give those rights to a label you're working? Are you able to make the guarantees to a platform that you're working with that you've got the right to give them, the entitlement to make this available? And in that, again, think about whether you've got the rights to the song, whether you've got the rights to use the sound recording. Two different things. Check this off when you're looking to sell records and make sure you've got proper rights there. A lot of this is very, very simple to sort out, very, very simple contractually to sort out. If you get further down the line and you've not got it sorted out, a lot of money coming in, you're really a hostage to, the fortune of the people that you haven't got the rights for, so, and less people are concerned when there's no money on the table. Money on the table, whether you're a bass player or drummer in the Smiths or something like that, or in any other band, it changes people when you're successful. So it's a very, very simple thing to sort out initially. Can be a real pain in the ass to sort out if you haven't done it at a later date. The last thing I'll mention on selling records is when you're looking at interacting with other people, whether that's a transfer of rights, whether it's a record label with a distribution contract, what does the deal say? What royalty are you getting? What are you getting paid? When you're getting paid? Those are the most important things that you need to have in there. If the contract is not clear, payment and subject matter, excuse me, you've got an issue there when you think you should be getting paid. So it'll be very simple. It doesn't have to be a 100-page record contract. It can be done in 1 or 2 pages. Get these fundamental points of what you're getting paid, when you're getting paid, very clear. Okay, excellent. We can jump on to the next slide, Kira. Okay. Now, publishing income is the next area. So you get your recording contract, which deals with actively selling units of your song to the public. Then you look at publishing income. Now, publishing income can concern songwriters, the authors, and performers. Now, the most important thing to remember here, as I touched on before, is the difference between the copyright in the song and the copyright in the sound recording. Effectively, when you've written a song or you've performed on a song, you can get certain rights, as I said before, to income, generally where that song, that sound recording is performed, shown, broadcast, played in public. Those rights predominantly dealt with by what we call collecting societies. Now, you will have probably heard of the PRS, EPL, and the MCPS. The PRS are collective rights management organizations. So you, as a songwriter, when you've written a song, should become a member of PRS. PRS have a whole different bunch of people, different bunch of songwriters that all become members. All of these members ask the PRS to collectively manage certain rights for them, to take those rights and to charge other people for use of those rights. Now, the PRS stands for the Performing Rights Society. So, the clue's in the name, they administer the right to perform, broadcast, show, or play a musical work in public. So they take all these different rights, managing for different people, and they will charge fees to things like Radio 1, things like certain platforms. They will look for returns and charge venues, hairdressers, butchers' shops, all these different places where music can be played in public. They will take a whole load of information in to work out roughly what is played where and when, and then all of these different fees that they charge different people doing these things. Where music is performed, shown, broadcast, or played in public. They will then share out that income amongst their members. So, simple point, if you're not a member, you're not going to get a share, PRS are very strong on enforcement as well. If you're not a member, of course, you have the individual right to go to Radio 1 or to your local butcher's shop, or to Quick Fit, or to our reception, and say, you've played my music there once last February, give me a royalty for that, but that's practically not feasible for you to do. So the benefit that they offer there's collective management, collective enforcement, and they will go, to different places, different organizations, different companies. If they're using music and they aren't licensed, they will take action to deal with that. So the benefits of being a member, songwriter of the PRS are huge. Now, PRS deal with effectively the performing right for authors of musical work. If you're a performer and a sound recording of a musical work, PRS don't deal with that. But the PPL will do that. Will deal with that. They're called phonographic performers. So they effectively, in essence, do the same as what the PRS do, but they do it for performers of musical works. So if you're performing on a musical work, sound recording of a musical work which has been commercially released, do become a member of the PPL. Because again, potentially, you're going to get some income out of that. Two very, very useful organizations. The MCPS, third organization I'll mention briefly, they deal with licensing the right to what we call mechanical copies of sound recordings. So record labels will become members of the MCPS because record labels make copies of sound recordings and they sell them to the public. So whenever you're operating as a record label, making a mechanical copy, you will have to pay a percentage across to the MCPS. Again, useful organization to collect monies in relation to use copyrights. That's a very, very quick summary. If you want to go to the websites of any of these organizations, very, very useful information there to find out more about what they do. But if you're not a member of the PRS or PPL, or indeed if you're not a member of the Musicians Union, because they're a very good organization too, then definitely become a member at this point in time. So other things publishers will do, they will license out, look for opportunities to license out use of a song, for example, into advertising, television, film. And that's what we call the right to synchronize a piece of music with film or TV. So again, publishing income, a very, very useful source of making money from the work you're involved in. Again, publishing, look at what you're going to get paid, when you're going to get paid. Important points in any contract. Again, as with record companies, distributors, look at what your publisher is going to do for you, to help make money out of the work. A publisher will generally look to be appointed exclusively. Same with record labels, so they're the only ones doing stuff with your work, which means you can't go elsewhere with that. So if you're giving, I'll touch again on this as a reminder towards the end, if you're giving anyone exclusive rights in relation to doing things with your work, make sure you're going to, what you're going to get paid and when, but also make sure what are they going to do with your work to help you make money. Otherwise, if they're not obliged to do anything, you'll be stuck on the shelf there and you could be precluded from going anywhere else with that. No? Okay, if we jump on to the next slide, that would be great. Okay, so live. Very simple one in a lot of ways. Again, to reiterate what we've come across before, so we're taking one message out of today. Who's going to pay you to do what and when? Somebody wants to book you. When are you getting paid? How much are you getting? Are you getting paid a flat fee? So you turn up to do a gig in the West End of Glasgow, you're getting paid £100, £200. Simple. Turning up to do Reading Festival as a headliner, getting paid £1 million. Very simple. All in between. Another way of looking at it is to do a split on the takings, a split on the door effectively. So, the promoter will get an amount and you as a band or a performer, a solo performer, will get a certain amount. That way, you're kind of sharing the risk, Like which way is best? It really depends on the circumstances, how well you think you're going to sell. how big the venue is that you're going into. The difference with a flat fee, of course, it's simple. You know when you're going to get paid. You're going to get paid that even if nobody turns up. If you're doing a split, you might get a better deal than a flat fee. If you're sharing risk, nobody turns up, and that's the problem. If you're doing a split on the takings, when are you going to do the accounting and reconciliation? When's that going to happen? Traditionally, you would want to do this basically, after the end of the night, pretty quickly, so you can do the split before you leave the venue. So if you leave it longer, then is that going to impact upon your cash flow? Why can't you do it at the end of the night? There aren't going to be any more tickets sold at that point in time. Of course, those that have been involved in live promotion will know the joy of having gone through a long night of doing work, and then you're sitting at 3:30 in the morning, totting up cash and agreeing to split, which is, well, it's the nature of the beast, but it doesn't help a good sleeping pattern, certainly. The other thing, more so now than ever, as most of you will know, is to look at what we call frustration. And by that, I don't mean the frustrated and tortured artist sitting away somewhere and creating the most wonderful musical works. It's a concept of a contractual concept under law, which applies to unexpected events arising. Ideally, in a contract for live, everybody really should do now, look at what happens if the unexpected happens. Now, I'm not saying that you should try and work out every different thing that could happen, but what if something comes up, which means that you can't do the gig? And if you can allocate fault, whose fault would that be? If you can't allocate fault, how is the risk of that unexpected event going to be shared? So if a band member falls ill and you have to reschedule, what's going to happen to your fee? What's going to happen at that point in time? Are you going to be able to reschedule to a later date and still get paid? Or are you going to have to cancel? Are you going to have to give back something, the amount that you've already been paid? If there's a change in the law or governmental guidance, which says you can't do this event because there has been an uplift in pandemic infections, we're going to have to lock down. What happens at that point in time? Who's going to carry the risk in that? Now, if you don't cover that off in the contract, what we say is that the contract has been frustrated, which means it is incapable of performance as originally envisaged. Now, in that situation, effectively, if you've been paid an amount in advance, you're going to have to give that back. Whoever's paid you, you no longer can do the event. The only thing that you're going to be able to keep are what to cover your reasonable costs that you've incurred up to that point in time that the contract became frustrated. Now, with a gig, it's likely in a gig in 3 months' time, you can no longer do it. Your costs in relation to that are going to be minimal at this point in time. So frustration really doesn't help the artist at that point in time. It doesn't allow you to keep the deposit. But what you can do is have a think about this and say, what happens in the contract? So you can say, if you're no longer able to do the event because of a change in law or a change in guidance or whatever, something which is not your fault, you've got the right to reschedule it to a later date. And or you still get paid, and or you still keep the deposit you've got. If you do that, protect yourself against issues happening further down the line. If the venue wants to cancel for reasons of their own doing, or because they can no longer do it, then put stuff in your contract which says you're still going to get paid, because you're booked. You can't double book, so your ability to go somewhere else, and to get income, that's probably going to be detrimentally impacted. If you're running the event yourself, look at insurance. There's more protections which have come out over the last few months, 6 months, a year, in relation to the live music industry than there were before. There is potentially some support. If you're running the event yourself, look at what you can do, to cover yourself against the risks of rescheduling, insuring against cancellation to the extent that you can. You see with a lot of events, whilst the underlying legal position with consumers is you might have to give them a refund, a lot of the protection they bring in relates to kind of practical management and customer engagement more than anything else, giving people a chance to reschedule or to get a ticket for the next time we do the event. A lot of people will take this, so think about how you engage with your customers alongside the legal side of things if you're running it yourself, because that can really help in a lot of situations. Okay, Kira, I'm conscious time's moving on, so we can move on to the last slide. That would be great. So merchandising is the last bit that I'm going to talk about. Now, as I said, this can be anything, T-shirts to posters to coffins, everything in between. Typically in this area, if you're looking to tie up with other people, which is often a good idea because getting decent merchandising out there and supplied into shops and premises and so on, it might not be your core expertise. So it makes sense to go to somebody who does this as a business, particularly because those people will know how to get stuff manufactured cheaply and to where you want it on time, which is really, particularly since a lot of supply chains are international, can be reasonably complex things to do. When you're looking at putting arrangements in place, it doesn't generally make sense to go to one person for everything. There might be somebody who's very good in one area, like clothing, that would be good to tie up with. And there might be somebody in another area, which different type of merchandising, dolls or whatever, that you can tie up with. That would be very, very useful. So look at different arrangements for different product lines. It can move into, when you get well known, into the areas of endorsement, sponsorship. So that would be tie-ups of things like, Jim Dunlop on certain bits of pedals and electrums and things like that. It could be tie-ups with guitar manufacturers. Again, look who's best for putting in place in each of those different relationships. Again, of course, I'll mention what you're going to get paid and when. You can look at doing some of this on a DIY basis. That's much, much easier than it ever has, particularly in the clothing side of things. There are a lot of sites out there that will, Spreadshirt and other places, that will effectively, you upload your artwork, you create an account, and they give you a shop front. They will supply to consumers, deal with all the fulfillment, and account back to you, for sales that you've made through there. So effectively a plug-in provider for these things. Very environmentally friendly, as a lot of them just print on demand as well, rather than holding significant amounts of stock. So have a look and see what's out there, what you can plug in to do in those different areas on a DIY basis. Again, you're going to have to look at share of the money that you're getting for that. But you know what? It's a hell of a lot easier to do than starting your own clothing business alongside trying to run a band or music career. When you go into these arrangements, particularly ones, kind of the more traditional ones, look at the termination arrangements you've got in any contracts. When can you get out of it? You might be able to get a better deal somewhere else. Have a look at whether there's any targets for sales in there. Are they going to undertake to sell a certain minimum amount for you? Your image is worth a certain amount, so they should do something with it. They should guarantee they're going to be able to do something with it. When you get to the end of the arrangement, also, what is going to happen to any unsold stock? You're going to get a right to buy that back and resell it yourself. or is it going to end up in discount retail or somewhere, which might impact what you're doing with another relationship? So these are the kind of things when you get into kind of the bigger and deeper merchandising relationships you're going to think about. If you could jump on to the next slide, Peter, that'd be great. So, general issues that I'll just give you a bit of guidance on here. When you're going into a relationship with any third party, whether it be a record label, distributor, publisher, merchandise company, in the words of the Fold, check the track record. What have they done before? Have they done stuff which fits with your kind of musical identity? Has it been good? Do you respect them as an organization to go with? Check their track record. Biggest thing from a legal point of view that we can recommend that you do with any relationship that you want to generate money rather than create a dispute. Get it down what you agree in writing. Make it simple, make it clear, and then you've got some dependability. Third thing, think about the unexpected. What happens if there's another pandemic? What happens if there's a split in the band? What happens to that one? These are issues that do come up, and if you don't get in writing, you don't get it addressed. You might have a record label that's sitting on a bunch of royalties and won't pay them out because the band can't pay for who they're to go to. Next thing, again, what have you done for me lately? If they're going to support things, your music's great. What are they going to do to help you get that out there? I'll mention in most of these relationships the danger of what we call recoupable costs. They may be supporting what you're doing. Those costs may be recoupable. Watch out for this. Very, very important. They may be spending 10 grand on marketing, 10 grand on a studio, 20 grand on tour support, but that money might be deducted from your royalties before anything gets paid for you. So what are they footing the bill for? What's it recoupable for what they should be paying for you? Territoriality is something which has come up much more often in recent years than it used to. Quite possible for you to have different people in different countries. A label in the US might be much better for the US, but terrible for Germany. Why don't you have different labels in different places? Same with publishing arrangements, same with merchandise. Look at splitting things up, to whoever's best in the right area for you to do things. This also leads on to another point. Don't give away too much. If you've got a label in the US and wants to release your work, give them the US. They want the world. Why do they want the world? What are they going to do for the world? Maybe they're not able to service the whole of the world for you. So don't give away too much, even if people ask for it. Options are a point which comes up in relation to that quite often. Give them your first album. Are they going to have a right to have the next 5 or 10 albums? If so, is this just something which they can decide at whim whether to exercise without there being any trigger? Triggers would be things like they maybe get an option, but they've had to have made a certain amount of sales for you. Otherwise, you can go somewhere else. So what triggers their ability to tie you in for a longer period? One thing I can always say comes from experience with labels and other people. Chase. If people aren't giving you the information, keep chasing, keep on top of them, keep hammering away at them until they get what they give you, what they're supposed to give you. It can be a bit of a sin to just go into something and then not try to manage it. A contract kind of really starts the process of engagement with somebody. It's not the end of it. You do need to manage these things. Last point I'll mention, if you're doing anything across border, think about, particularly now, UK's left the European Union, things like tariffs, duties, and withholding tax. That could probably form a seminar in itself, but these are points where you might get deductions from money before it's paid across to you. But there are ways you can potentially get around that. There are registrations that you can potentially do. So if you're looking at any of that, feel free to get into contact with us and I can talk you through what you might be looking at in a particular situation. So I think that's everything I was going to add just now. We can jump on to the next slide, Kira. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Graham, who hopefully I've left enough time to talk through his elements and I've not gone on too much. He's going to go through kind of what you need to do, what you can look at in relation to disputes. So over to you, Graham.
Thanks very much, Jamie, and hi everyone. Thanks very much for having me on today. As Jamie said, I'm just going to briefly run through the kind of steps in the process of settling the dispute that are kind of outlined there in the slide. Not necessarily all apply to every single dispute, but these are the different stages that you might expect to go through. And then I'm going to put in a couple of tips about how best to try and recover your money and the things to consider when doing so. So firstly, in settling dispute, always the first port of call, either before things start to get nasty or while they're nasty, but before involving solicitors, is to discuss things directly with we'll call them the counterparty, the person on the other end of the dispute. Usually that can stop things escalating quicker than hoped, bring down costs. There's a couple of things to consider with that, though. Importantly, you don't want to commit to a concession on something. If you have a contractual dispute, let's say, and you are due a certain amount of money, you don't want to agree to a concession without taking proper advice as to whether or not that is the best thing to do in the scenario, or whether or not you're committing yourself to something more in terms of a further contract, let's say. It's important to consider that before you agree to anything. As Jamie kind of touched on before, get everything in writing. Follow-up calls you have with the counterparty in emails as well, so that everything or as much as you possibly can is documented. If you're agreeing to something that resolves a matter, it's always good to email, even in these circumstances, and say, this is what we agreed to, and try and get a response from them that says, yes, that's right. It's a simple way of documenting what the agreement is, so that there's not confusion or a dispute within a dispute later down the line, with someone saying, no, that's not what we said, that's not what we agreed to. So while you're doing that, or before you're doing that with the counterparty, trying to keep solicitors or other representatives out of it, you can also be speaking to solicitors in the background to get any guidance or any advice you need, whether that's from the Musicians Union or from us, or from someone else that can basically steer you in the right direction. You don't need to be saying that to the counterparty when you're negotiating with them or discussing things with them, but we can be keeping you right. We can be documenting an agreement that is made. So at the end of a dispute, if you have agreed something with the counterparty just between you two, we can then document that and make sure that everything's covered off as well at the end. If speaking with the counterparty doesn't quite do it, and you're either getting ignored or they're being particularly bullish, then the next logical step is to issue formal correspondence from a solicitor. Basically what this does is illustrate to the counterparty that you're taking the matter seriously and that you want the matter properly dealt with and documented. It's relatively quick and cost effective in Scotland. You require as little as 7 days from the issuing of the letter before you then take a further step, such as a court action. So you can elicit a response and hopefully a resolution relatively quickly. And it's relatively cheap to do. If you're instructing solicitor to do that, we would do that. It would take roughly an hour or two of our time. So it's not particularly onerous on the person that's looking to try and show strength in a dispute, which is sometimes the way that these things leverage into resolving themselves as well. Moving on, if you are engaging either via a solicitor's letter or just directly with a counterparty, there are alternative means of resolving disputes that are formal procedures that are not just going straight into a court action, which I'll come on to in a second. The most meaningful in disputes that might arise for members in the Musicians Union is maybe mediation, which is effectively where an independent mediator comes in. It's like group therapy for a dispute, whereby a mediator will speak to both sides, will understand what everybody's wanting from it, and will see where there is a concession and where things can be agreed. It can be relatively cheap if the dispute is not worth a lot of money. If the dispute is worth a lot of money, it can also be relatively cheap because it tends to wrap things up too. Usually a court, before you proceed with a court action or if you've initiated a court action, but before you carry on with it, particularly in the summary small claims track, which I'll come on to in a second, it is increasingly encouraging mediation amongst parties as an alternative to hashing it out in court. Another potential avenue in terms of alternative dispute resolution is arbitration, which is effectively where a skilled person with particular sets of skills and knowledge in a particular area makes an assessment as if they were a judge, and you go through a formal court process or a process akin to a court action, and this skilled person then makes a determination at the end. It's important, if you have a contract with somebody and a dispute is arising, that you're aware of whether there are provisions in that contract for you to mediate or for you to go to arbitration before you raise court proceedings. And so it's important to hone in on these things and take these steps before you initiate a court action, or you could end up being left in a situation where you're forced to go back to that route and you're spending more money doing that as well. Now, if a court action is necessary, there are various different ways in which a court action can be dealt with. It mainly depends on the value of the claim. So, as Jamie touched upon, the small claims track, or what is referred to in Scotland as the simple procedure track, is effectively for disputes that are worth £5,000 or less in terms of monetary value. It's a very much simplified process. It's largely now done via an online system whereby you submit a claim form, which briefly sets out what your case is, why you think you should be due money back, why you think that you should be getting an order from the court, making the court or making that person do something. And then you start a process whereby that person will be afforded the opportunity to defend the claim, and then a judge will get involved and make a determination either from a procedural perspective or then on a final basis, and you'll get a court order at the end of that. The important thing with simple procedure is that it's constructed so that parties can deal with it themselves and they don't necessarily need to instruct solicitors. But they're also afforded an opportunity to have representatives who are either solicitors or advice organisations, advocacy organisations. And the court's very much aware that people do need support through these processes and might not necessarily want to spend lots of money getting that support. So the rules are all designed as being very straightforward. It's very much a question and answer type rule process. What do I do in this scenario? You do this. And it's very easy to follow as well. Most importantly will be that there's a cap on expenses. So if you are incurring legal expense in a court action, usually if you're successful, you can recover your expense or a proportion of it. And if you're unsuccessful, you have to pay the other side's legal expenses. With simple procedure, there's a cap on how much someone can recover from you if you're unsuccessful. So what it does is it minimises the risk to you that might make you think twice about raising a court action, because even if you do raise it and you're unsuccessful, there's only so much money that the other party can recover from you as a result of that court process. Moving on to the what we'll call the higher courts or the higher court procedures, there's the ordinary court procedure, which is for disputes from about £5,000 to £100,000, and that's in simple procedure and the ordinary procedure are in the sheriff courts in Scotland that are dotted all about the different jurisdictions in Scotland. It's more of a formalised technical process. It can still be conducted by yourself because the court does appreciate that even if the sum of money is more, it still might be the case that you don't want to pay for solicitors' fees. But because of the more technical process, it's advisable to get a solicitor. Quite importantly, with an ordinary court process, there is no necessary cap on expenses. So you may be liable for much more expenses than you might have anticipated, even in terms of how much the case is worth to you, in terms of whatever money you're trying to get back. And then finally, you have the Court of Session, which is effectively the civil high court in Scotland, and that's for disputes with a monetary value of over £100,000. And again, this is a more formalised technical process and involves the instruction of advocates, so not just solicitors in Scotland. advocates have got a higher rate of audience, and obviously with them attracts a higher cost for somebody who's potentially conducting a case. Again, there's no caps on expenses, but it can be seen sometimes if a dispute is worth that much money, it can be seen as being worthwhile raising it in the court of session because of the speed of the procedure. There isn't as much work in the court of session because there's a lot of stuff done in the ordinary court process. So it might be that your dispute is resolved quicker. I think what's important to remember about a court action is that you don't just go to court to recover money from somebody. You can, in any of either simple procedure, ordinary, or the court session, you can go to court to require the delivery of something back in terms of goods, merchandise. It might be that you've given out but haven't been paid for yet. You can ask the court to present an order to the other party to give you that back. It might be to stop somebody doing something. So, for instance, if there is some sort of copyright infringement in the work that you have put out and somebody else is using that improperly, you can obtain orders from the court to stop them doing whatever they're doing. There's also then the proactive orders, whereby you can ask a court to make an order to make someone do something as well. So it's quite important that it's not necessarily all about, I can only raise a court action if I need money back. Obviously, that is at the centre of the majority of disputes, but there is various things that you can do in any of these court procedures that might be better than actually getting money back as well. You just move on to the next slide, please. Yeah. And so the final topic I'm going to speak about is the actual recovery of money. So the fundamental question that we always get asked, or the fundamental thing that we assess when clients come to us, is the proportionality of going down any of the routes that I've just set out there. Is the case worth enough to you to go down these routes and potentially spend money in going down these routes? But most importantly, is the person that you're dealing with, the counterparty, are you actually going to be able to recover money from them? And that might be money in terms of what you're due under a contract, or in terms of what you're due in damages. But it also might be the expense that you're being put to. Is it worth doing if you're not going to get that money back? So the first assessment you should always make is, who is it I'm dealing with here? Is it a limited company? Is it a partnership? Or is it just an individual? Does that individual have any money? Do they have any other assets that I might be able to do diligence on, which I'll come on to in a minute, to try and realise any amount of money that I'm entitled to as well? We can conduct it, and other parties can conduct credit checks, financial screening before you take the step or take the plunge into raising court proceedings as well. There's also provisions that you can do during a court procedure and other procedures to try and get security for your costs as well. So if you're thinking that an action is going to cost you a certain amount of money, and you're worried that you might not be able to recover that, and you're concerned about the financial viability of the person that's on the other end of the dispute, you can make applications to the court to get that party to provide security for their costs as well. So these are all important factors that should be considered before you jump into raising court action or other sort of recovery steps as well. As I touched on before, a lot of disputes, especially in court, centre around, it's not just about the amount of money that you want to get back or the order that you want to get to stop someone doing something. It's also about the expense of you being put to having to go to that step. So generally speaking, you're able to recover, as I said, your legal expense in these types of disputes, but you can only recover a proportion of that. So if you've spent £5,000 going through a simple procedure or an ordinary court action, you're only going to be able to recover about, roughly speaking, we find about 50 to 60% of the overall legal costs you've incurred from the counterparty at the end of the day. So that's an important thing to realise, is that it might not always be the right thing to do to go into court. It might be more sensible to take different tracks to try and recover your money and resolve the dispute. There's also certain things that certainly court fees that you incur as well, which you can recover, but it's an important element, especially so if it's a simple procedure case, the only court fee that you actually have to incur to raise the claim and to run the case is a court fee of £106. So that's a fee that the court asks to be paid before you can initiate your claim. But if you were to raise a claim that's worth £5,000 or more, there's various court fees that accrue over time. So you're going to end up spending at least £1,000 or a couple of grand on court fees alone, never mind the legal expenses of dealing with something. So at the end of the day, if you have gone through the whole process and you have obtained a court order at the end of the day that says this counterparty needs to pay me this amount of money and they also should be paying me my legal expenses, what is it that you can do with that court order? There's various diligence steps. So these are steps that you can take to try and realise the cash in these orders. And that might be arresting money in bank accounts that you know that person has, arresting earnings if that person's got a separate living. It could be attaching goods of value and then auctioning them off to recover the money. For the obvious example of this scenario is potentially instruments that people might have that you can attach in that scenario. And then it could be potentially if they own property as well, you can inhibit the sale of property, so you can prevent a property being sold until you've realised the cash that you're due. And finally, what you can do is you can wind up a company, so make a company solvent, or you can bankrupt an individual to try and recover the money. These are obviously last resorts, but there's a variety of different things you can do with a court order in order to try and recover the cash that's due to you. Potential alternative recovery routes as well, very quickly, is the ability to send out statutory demands, which are effectively circumventing a court procedure. And if there is a debt that you know is not going to be disputed, and this is the important element of it, if you know it's not going to be disputed, then you can issue a statutory demand to the person that is your debtor to say, pay up within 21 days or else. And that or else is that you might either wind up a company or make an individual bankrupt. And it can sometimes be a very quick way of getting payment, but it only works in a scenario where you know that the debt is not disputed. If there is some sort of dispute and they respond within that time period, then you're back to the original routes that I touched on initially when I started speaking as well. So there's a variety of things you can potentially do in different scenarios, and there's no one size fits all. It entirely depends on the person you're dealing with. On the other end of the dispute, it entirely depends on the kind of value of the claim. It entirely depends on how quickly you need something done. And it also depends on the extent that you're willing to go to get something resolved as well. So with any of these things, as we've obviously got the ad hoc service, if you are on the cusp of that or expecting something to come in terms of a dispute, pick up the phone to us and speak to us about it and can have an initial chat before it starts to run out of control. It's always important to do that. But that pretty much ties up everything that I was looking to speak about. Obviously, if there's any questions as well, I'm happy to answer any of them, likewise separately in an email as well if need be. But thanks very much.
And many thanks, Graham. If we got any questions from anybody, as I said, there's our contact details. So if there is something that you want to ask and you don't want to do it just now, you think about it after, just drop us an email through. Be more than happy to pick up on that. Give it a second. No, not seeing anything coming through. So
I think there's one. Sorry, Jamie.
Sorry. Yeah.
Mark.
Sorry, Mark. Yeah.
I was just going to ask a wee question. So we'll go back to the stuff at the beginning. In terms of what I should have in place, I've been doing a lot more kind of production work and recording and production on a young songwriter's material, and just wondering what you would advise in terms of, we're just about to finish an album, and then I'm kind of trying to work out where I stand in terms of should I be putting in place for royalties, etc.
Yeah, have you got anything kind of agreed with them?
No, it's been a kind of project that grew out from a kind of giving her some lessons, and there's then going on to actually, producing and recording.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have them probably in place. I mean, because you've spent time on, getting them to where they are now. They've brought, their creative input. You've brought your creative input. I mean, it probably makes sense to have a very short agreement in place, just saying, I mean, is it on particular songs that you've been working on? Or?
I mean, I've produced the whole album, but there's some of them that I've done more creative stuff and other stuff that I've more just worked on a kind of recording side. So.
Yeah. I mean, if you've got the fine works coming out of it, just having a chat with her and saying, when what we're going to do next, what you're going to do next, to take this further, and agree, on the fact that you would normally kind of charge for this, let's agree a split, or, the what would kind of industry term, get a few points on the album, this producer, I mean, I've certainly seen that. It's just making sure you can have that discussion.
Yeah.
At this point in time, and then, put it down in writing, so you've got, something which is, any money's generated that, off the back of the exploitation of, these songs or sound recordings that you get, 5 or 10% or whatever, whatever it's going to fare in the circumstances, you manage to kind of both, settle on. The thing is, I mean, it may be, if they're successful, it may be a route into doing a lot further work with it as well. So, I mean, balance that off,
That's kind of what I was thinking, but I just, I think that it's possible potential that it could go somewhere. So I'm kind of thinking get something in place.
I mean, kind of have that discussion now before there's any success, because, as I said, the success, it becomes a different discussion at that point in time, not least as you may get managers and going, well, they got nothing to read, it's it's easier to do now than later. Certainly, okay, excellent. And anything from anyone else, Aidan?
I've got just a very quick one, and I'm sure it probably varies from sort of library to library, but if you're thinking about, let's say you've produced an album or some tracks, whatever, and you want to get it into a production music library so that they can organize the synchronizing and all of that. Is it, it might vary, but do you have to register that individually as your work with a performing rights organization, or is that usually left up to the library?
I mean, you should become, if you're a member of the PRS, PPL, I would look to register that yourself. Ask them the question if they're going to do it, because the last thing we want to do is, if that's not registered, then, you're going to miss out. So, ask them, say you're going to do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Unless they're good, so let them know, and then pirate it, so, because, you don't want it to, you think they're doing it and they think you're doing it, and in fact, nobody does it, then you don't get paid. It's probably the simplest way to answer that question.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Anything from anyone else? As I said, you can always drop a further question through to us if need be. But anyway, thank you very much for attending, and Graham for presenting with me. Our next monthly MU webinar will be on sampling covers and other people's work, an update on the law surrounding that, what you can use, what you can't use, what you should do to make sure you can use, what you're going to use, all of that sort of stuff. That's going to be in early October. So hope you can make it for that with us as well. But otherwise, I hope you all have a good rest of your day. And thanks for joining us.